like to take a look at precipitation over the last 7 days, and across the Midwest you can see some enhanced rainfall. That's the area in green, an inch or two from parts of Minnesota down through Iowa into parts of Kansas and Missouri. Also in the Great Plains, the upper Great Plains, some rainfall in the inch or two range, but most of the rain in blue was anywhere from just a quarter inch up to a half inch. So we've seen this now for a while. Even though some rain has been occurring in the Midwest, for the most part it's been light and generally below normal. Now last week, if we look at the percent of normal rainfall, we sort of see a mixed picture here. The blues and the purple are above normal, and we see the northern tier received well above normal precipitation. North Dakota 2, 3, 4 times normal rainfall. But then if we move to the eastern part and into Minnesota, we see below normal. So it's sort of a mixed picture there. Likewise, through Nebraska and Kansas, we see areas of above normal and below normal, and that extends off to the east into Iowa as well as further south into Kansas and Missouri. So we really see a mismatch here of some areas receiving rain that is definitely needed, other areas remaining fairly dry. Now I wanted to point out, sort of step back and look at some of the big trends for November. In November, from a climatological perspective, we see 3 areas where there's some enhanced signals. The Pacific Northwest, that usually gets a lot of rain, the South Central U.S. that gets significant rain, and then the Northeast U.S. Over the Midwest, it's fairly quiet in November. Sometimes there can be some active patterns that move through fronts producing severe weather, but for the most part, generally anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rain over the region. And I think that's been generally the pattern we've seen so far in November. Nothing, strong one way or the other as far as the signal goes. Now, the drought monitor shows that we're still continuing to experience a very significant drought, especially from South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, parts of Iowa and Minnesota. We've really have seen some improvement over Missouri and Illinois. You might remember with Isaac starting, and ever since then we've had some more significant rainfall in this region here. So it's been eroding the drought from the east in this region. But the core of drought has remained pretty much the same, and you can see the majority of the nation's currently in drought. Only 27% of the nation is not in drought at this current time. So let's step back and look at the big picture for the Midwest. We're going to start the week with a fairly vigorous dip in the jet stream over the middle part of the nation. Some good atmospheric energy with this system. It's going to be moving off to the east, and it'll be producing some significant rainfall over parts of Iowa, Missouri, and areas surrounding. And then by the end of the week, we're getting into this, what I call a sloppy zonal flow. And what that means is that the jet stream will be flowing from west to east fairly quickly with relatively weak type of energy embedded in that from time to time. It's not all that impressive, and consequently, if there's any rain other than this first system, it's going to be generally on the weak side and fairly light. Now, the pattern change that we've seen is in October, we were in a negative Arctic oscillation in this region here. More recently, we've gone into a positive Arctic oscillation that continues, or forecast to continue through the month. What we see here, this is a 6 to 10 day jet stream, the anomaly, so how it's standing out one way or the other compared to normal. And what we see over most of the Midwest here are positive anomalies. That's this center here in red. And what that's saying is the jet stream is going to be bowing to the north, especially closer to this area of the strongest red here. And what that will mean is that the jet stream is going to be pushing up further to the north, and that's going to keep most of the Midwest fairly dry with above normal temperatures until that pattern breaks down. But that looks like the dominant pattern as we get into the rest of November. Now, short-term rainfall for the next couple weeks, these are some models. The rain that extends from Wisconsin down to Missouri is the rain that's occurring early in the period. Otherwise, it looks very quiet over much of the Midwest. Again, as we get to that zonal flow, systems will be moving through quick. They'll be fairly weak, and it looks very dry. And in week 2, even though these models can flip-flop quite a bit, and there is some precip, there will be some frontal passages. Again, over the Midwest, it looks fairly dry. So I think we're looking at a pretty quiet pattern, and again, there'll be some spots that'll see a bit above normal rainfall. I think there'll be many more bigger area that will receive below normal rainfall. I mentioned that the drought was being carved out from the east to the west, and we're going to see that again early this week as that front goes through, produces an inch or two of rain. We are going to see some significant improvement again over parts of Illinois down through eastern Missouri, parts of Arkansas and Oklahoma. And you can see many of these areas need 3 to 6 inches of rain more in Arkansas, and take an inch off that. So there's still going to be a drought in the area, but we're seeing significant improvement over central Missouri, eastern Missouri, and much of Illinois, not just from this rain, but from multiple rains in that area. Further to the west, not nearly as much rain, and the drought persists. As much as 9 to 12 inches we would need in Nebraska and other parts of western Missouri, parts of Kansas, Iowa as well, to get back to normal. I wanted to point out a number of models. There are all sorts of longer-term climate models. This is just one of them, predicting soil moisture percentiles. And this is showing by the end of November that most of the negative percentiles, or the very dry soils, will continue over the Midwest. As we get into Missouri and Illinois, it's getting back to normal. It's beginning to erode from that direction, from the east to the west. But the core over parts of all the way from Kansas and Nebraska and parts of the upper Midwest and all the way up into Minnesota look like soil moisture negative anomalies will continue. So the trends and threats this week, early this week, as I mentioned, an inch or so of rain over the eastern parts of the Midwest. Otherwise, over a very broad part of the Midwest and Great Plains, well below normal precipitation, 25% or less rainfall, and the drought will persist. So the takeaway points from the Midwest edition of the Weekly Water Outlook: a weak upper flow pattern will set in this week from west to east. Jet will be anchored unusually far north, at least over the central and eastern part of the U.S. There'll be about one frontal passage early this week, maybe one later this week as well, but precipitation should average well below normal, or at least below normal over most of the area, and with the exception of maybe the Pacific Northwest. So Midwest still looks like, even though we will get some early precip, for the most part below normal rainfall. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Midwest Weekly Water Outlook. I will be updating this throughout the week with additional information. Thank you for listening.